Hello, everyone. This is the Catholic Esquire. I don't know about you, but I am getting so sick and tired of these professional trad ink know-it-alls who consistently virtue signal through their servile obedience in order to appear that they're some super holy, obedient, perfect Catholic to the Holy Father. He's so obedient to the Holy Father, while the rest of the church collapses around us everywhere. And these guys are supposed to be at the forefront of the battle, at the forefront of the fight. They advertise being at the forefront of the battle. We're going to be the real counter-revolutionaries. You guys, this is getting to be insane. Now, I'm referring to Michael Matt. I'm sorry. I usually don't like to talk about names on this channel because it's not necessary. But the fact of the matter is that this guy tells you he's the godfather of the traditional movement. He doesn't let you get past that for more than 5 minutes. And then he tells you that everybody who has a problem with Leo, they have a problem because they just don't understand that we have to work within the system and we're going to change within the system because otherwise we're schismatic. We don't want to be schismatic. What is this guy even talking about? The problem is he talks to himself too much in the shower every morning instead of getting outside and listening to what other people have to say, you know? And you just can put on conference after conference after conference all you want and have all these people that agree with each other come and talk to each other. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is happening out there, Michael Matt. We're not in 1988 anymore, but he thinks we are. He wants to take us back to 1988 and tell you it's a good thing. It's a good thing when they suppress the traditional Latin Mass, even though he says he's a defender of the traditional Latin Mass. And it's a good thing when we, as Catholics, compromise on the truth and compromise on Jesus Christ, who is the truth, even though he claims to defend Jesus Christ. This is all sophistry. This is all it's sophistry. It's illogical, and it's quite frankly misleading a lot of honest people who can see a real problem out there in the world and know this extends just beyond not having the traditional Latin Mass at the local parish. This extends to the utter foundations of the entity that calls itself the Catholic Church. And if we don't get the issue right, if we don't get the problem right, nothing's going to change. So what am I talking about? Let's go ahead and take a look here. By the way, I'm going to refer to a fantastic article that Chris Jackson just recently published on his Substack called "Selling Out the Faith for a 1988 Big Wheel." I'm going to put a link to that article in the description to this video. It's a fantastic takedown of the failed strategy that Michael Matt is trying to sell all of us. All right. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're beginning here with this Chris Jackson article, Selling Out the Faith for a 1988 Big Wheel. Fantastic title. If you go down here, you can see the first tweet I want to look at from Michael Matt, dated November 13th, 2025. It says, "Two hopeful signs. The traditional Latin Mass is once again being allowed on the side altars in the Basilica of St. Peter, and Leo is reportedly allowing bishops to decide for themselves whether or not to allow the traditional Latin Mass in their diocese. The first bit of good news I have confirmed, the second one I have not, but we are working on it. Keep praying." So you see, he's saying this is a fantastic thing. Leo's going to allow bishops to decide for themselves whether or not to allow the traditional Latin Mass in their diocese. Now, there was another tweet he put out on X. I'm going to look at that. And then we're going to put it all together at the end here for you. But let's just look at some of the highlights. Michael Matt says, "Those of us who have been in these trenches all our lives know what to do." Really? When it comes to the diabolically disordered post-conciliar popes, we must keep a supernatural vision of what is happening to our church in crisis. Skipping down, we need not be constantly fixated on the Pope, whose words and acts on a daily basis are fallible. We need not parse every word. He's talking to you, Chris Jackson. We must not make him the pivotal point of our life as baptized Christians. Okay, let's scroll down some more. Again, Michael Matt says, it's the Mass that matters because it's the faith that matters, and the Latin Mass, as touchstone of the faith, defends and teaches the doctrine better than every pope in history. Now, St. Peter might have a disagreement with that, considering his teachings actually even made it into Holy Scripture. But let's just keep going on here. Michael Matt says, so what do we do if a pope preaches errors and commits scandals through his connivance with error and immoral events? We do what traditionalists have always done. We reject it, first in our mind and heart, and then publicly, always maintaining respect for the august office of the papacy. The Pope is human. He can sin. He can even go to hell. Only neo-Catholics and Sedevacantists would say otherwise. Now, I am not a Sedevacantist, but I'm pretty sure Sedevacantists don't say a pope can never go to hell. Anyway, he says we must double our prayers and sacrifices for the conversion of the pope. So is Michael Matt here admitting that Leo is not a Catholic? Now, you guys, this is craziness. Now, this was posted within, I think, 24 hours of this first post on X that talked about all the hopeful signs that Leo is going to allow bishops to decide for themselves whether or not to have the traditional Latin Mass. Now, I want to give you a little history here before I go any further. It's important you understand this, my friends. In 1984, Pope John Paul II issued a document, an indult for the use of the Roman Missal of 1962, so the traditional Latin Mass, called Quatuor Abincanos, indult for the use of the Roman Missal of 1962. This was from October of 1984. Now, in it, John Paul II says 4 years ago by the Supreme Pontiff John Paul, actually, I'm sorry, this is the Congregation for the Divine Worship, to the presidents of the Episcopal conferences. So this is not actually John Paul II writing this. This is the Congregation for Divine Worship at that time. So I'm sorry about that. Because it says here, 4 years ago, by order of the Supreme Pontiff John Paul II, the bishops of the whole church were invited to present a report. Then it says, concerning the way in which the priests and the faithful of their diocese had received the missal promulgated in 1970 by the authority of Pope Paul VI. That's the new Mass, okay, the Novus Ordo, in accordance with the decisions of the Second Vatican Council. Pause. And a slight tangent here. For all of these people, I'm talking to you, Dr. K, for all these people who say that the Second Vatican Council didn't call for a new Mass and is not the basis for the creation of a new Mass, someone needs to tell JP2 this, someone needs to tell all of these people in Rome this, because clearly they think the Second Vatican Council was the basis for drawing up and manufacturing this new Mass, the Novus Ordo. So, continuing on, sorry for the tangent. Concerning the difficulties arising in the implementation of liturgical reform and concerning possible resistance that may have arisen. Oh, there's possible resistance to the new Mass in 1984. So, this document goes on to say, the result of the consultation was sent to all the bishops. On the basis of the replies, it appears that the problem of priests and faithful holding to the so-called Tridentine Mass, Tridentine Rite, was almost completely solved. So they almost got rid of this problem of priests wanting to celebrate the TLM, you guys. Almost there. Since, however, you can just hear the sorrow in their voices here. Since, however, the same problem continues, the Supreme Pontiff, in a desire to meet the wishes of these groups, grants to diocesan bishops the possibility of using an indult, which basically is just permission. Okay, an indult is a permission or an exception from the standard law applicable at the time. Okay. grants to the diocesan bishops the possibility of using an indult, whereby priests and faithful, who shall be expressly indicated in the letter of request to be presented to their own bishop, may be able to celebrate Mass by using the Roman Missal according to the 1962 edition, but under the following conditions. Now, here are the conditions. A, that it be made publicly clear beyond all ambiguity that such priests and their respective faithful in no way share the positions of those who call into question the legitimacy and doctrinal exactitude of the Roman Missal promulgated by Pope Paul VI in 1970. So you cannot question that there's anything doctrinally wrong with the new Mass. That's a condition of saying the TLM. B, such celebration must be made only for the benefit of those groups that request it, in churches and oratories indicated by the bishop, not, however, in parish churches unless the bishop permits it in extraordinary cases, and on the days under the conditions fixed by the bishop, either habitually or in individual cases. So basically, this is saying this is completely in the hands of the bishop, and he has complete control and authority. C, these celebrations must be in accordance to the 1962 Missal in Latin. I think the reason why they put that in there, they wanted to make sure you don't go any further than 62. Don't you dare go back to that pre-1955 stuff. I think they wanted to make sure that was in there. D, there must be no interchanging of texts and rites of the two missals. God forbid, should anything from the TLM make its way into the Novus Ordo Mass, we wouldn't want to contaminate that beautiful, beautiful, artificially manufactured Mass from 1970. And E, each bishop must inform his congregations of the concessions granted by him, and at the end of the year, from the granting of this indult, he must report on the result of its application. So you need to make sure you're telling Rome also what you're doing so they can keep an eye on you. Okay, now that was the 1984 indult, all right? So that sets the stage for 1988, which is where Michael Matt wants to take us back to, because this is what's so exciting. So in 1988, what is that? That's Ecclesia Dei, apostolic letter from John Paul II. What happened between 1984 and 1988? Well, Archbishop Lefebvre, the founder of the Society of St. Pius X, SSPX, consecrated 4 bishops. And he consecrated 4 bishops without the permission of John Paul II and against his wishes. So that's what led us up to Ecclesia Dei in 1988. I've covered that plenty of times on this channel before. We don't need to go through everything about Ecclesia Dei, but I do want to highlight a few points in it because it's relevant to the topic today. Now, paragraph 4 is probably the most problematic section of Ecclesia Dei because it just teaches things that are basically heretical and not Catholic. Referring to Archbishop Lefebvre's consecrations of the 4 bishops, traditional bishops, which he refers to as a schismatic act, JP2 says, quote, the root of the schismatic act can be discerned in the incomplete and contradictory notion of tradition. Incomplete because it does not take sufficiently into account the living character of tradition, which, as the Second Vatican Council clearly taught, comes from the apostles and progresses in the Church with the help of the Holy Spirit. There is a growth and insight into the realities and words that are being passed on. A growth and insight. So this comes about in various ways. It comes through the contemplation of study of believers who ponder these things in their hearts. It comes from the intimate sense of spiritual realities which they experience. And it comes from the preaching of those who have received, along with their right of succession in the episcopate, the sure charism of truth. So, interesting, my friends, I think in the last video I discussed modernism and what it was and that it was condemned by Pope Pius X back in 1907. This is textbook modernism because JP2 says that tradition actually comes about in various ways, which includes contemplation of the study of believers who ponder things in their hearts. Remember how we talked about this notion of sentimentality and how the truth it bubbles up within the heart of the individual person. And he says it comes from the intimate sense of spiritual realities which they experience. So every single faith believer takes their experience and allows it to fester in their heart. And they take what they come from this and they listen to their preachers who are speaking the doctrine, and then they combine it together, and then they reach the full truth for themselves. That's textbook modernism. It's heretical, and it's in paragraph 4 of Ecclesia Dei. Now, the point of Ecclesia Dei document was to not only condemn Archbishop Lefebvre for holding to the true Catholic faith and the traditions as properly understood, but it was also to say, hey, look, I'm going to be a really nice guy here. We're going to give permission, this ongoing permission to say the traditional Latin Mass, so long as you do a few things. And he says, quote, moreover, I should like to remind theologians and other experts in the ecclesiastical sciences that they should feel free themselves called upon to answer in the present circumstances. Indeed, the extent and depth of the teaching of the Second Vatican Council call for a renewed commitment to deeper study in order to reveal clearly the Council's continuity with tradition. Don't say the Council's not in continuity with tradition, my friends. Continuing on, especially in points of doctrine, which perhaps because they're new, have not been well understood by some sections of the church. So here JP2 is telling you there's new points of doctrine in Second Vatican Council, and because they're new, not everyone understands them. He must be talking about those darn people that attend the TLM, isn't he? And so we have to have a commitment to deeper study of this council's continuity with tradition, the hermeneutic of continuity, as Pope Benedict would say. So you see, what they really care about is Second Vatican Council. They care about the revolution, and they're tying it to the practice as a condition to celebrating the TLM, my friends. That's the purpose of Ecclesia Dei. One more quote from this document. Quote, moreover, respect must everywhere be shown for the feelings of all of those who are attached to the Latin liturgical tradition by a wide and generous application of the directives already issued some time ago by the Apostolic See for the use of the Roman Missal according to the typical edition of 1962. Unquote. So, and it cites to the Quatuor ab Annos, which we just read from 1984. So basically, they're saying we're just keeping that in place. All the bishops have permission. It's up to the bishops to decide whether to celebrate the TLM on condition that the people who celebrate the TLM adhere to the Second Vatican Council and never, ever question that there's anything wrong with the council doctrinally. That's the conditions there. But, you know, he makes it clear here, you have to be generous with the application. So he kind of lightens up the 1984 indult a little bit, but essentially and substantively, it's the same thing. Okay, so let's wrap this up, put a nice little bow on this. What is Michael Matt and others like him trying to tell us? They're trying to tell us that it's a good thing if we just get back to 1988 now. Remember, it used to be we want to go back to 2007 in Summorum Pontificum, when priests had full reign to say the traditional Latin Mass without permission from the bishops. Now the Overton window's moved again, and we're back to 1988. We're back in time. Now we should just be happy with Leo giving bishops the authority and permission to give the priests permission to say the TLM. And what happens if the bishops decide not to give that permission? Well, absolutely nothing, of course, because nothing's changed about Traditionis Custodes. It is the default position. It's still the default position. And what happens when those brave bishops decide to give permission? Oh, they're going to be noticed, and they're going to be on a list now, aren't they? Good luck with your next appointment. But this is what Michael Matt tells us we should be happy about, because we're going to just get the TLM, maybe, if the bishops decide to give us permission to do it. Now, what was the point of that second tweet, though? That second post where he talks about Leo and how we don't have to really listen to him and how none of his doctrinal errors really matter. What was the point of doing that? Well, because Michael Matt understands that 1988, 1984 was ultimately about doctrinal crisis. That was the root of the problem with Archbishop Lefebvre. It was over doctrine in Vatican II, not the Mass. And so Michael Matt doesn't like to talk about that. It goes against his narrative. So he basically has to address it and says, look, don't worry about all that doctrinal stuff. We don't really have to listen to Leo anyway. We all know popes can mess up in their teachings. We don't, just put it aside. Stop worrying about it. Don't be like one of these hyper papalists like Tim Flanders will tell you, as they continually attack Vatican I without stating as such. We're just going to continue. We're just going to get past all that and enjoy the mass that you get from your bishop if they decide to give it to you. And that's really, what you should be happy with. And then, see, we take steps. Maybe then we can move forward in time and get back to 2007, Summorum Pontificum. Meanwhile, all of this stuff, the 1984 indult, Ecclesia Dei from 1988, even Summorum Pontificum in 2007, all of it says permission for this mass is all conditioned on your acceptance of Vatican II and all of its doctrinal errors, which of course they don't say that, but that's essentially the problem. Collegiality, religious liberty, ecumenism, all the stuff, all the chaos, all the insanity that we see in the church today, that's all part of and from Vatican II, and you are not allowed to contradict that or go against it as a condition of being able to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. So if you sound like this is just a false sale of goods here, yeah, it is. And that's why we really need to focus on having traditional leaders who understand the issues, who understand the problem, who refuse to compromise on the truth for some scraps off the table, and who are willing to stand up boldly and say, we reject Vatican II. We reject those in the hierarchy who are not Catholic. And we refuse to be servile and obedient to those who are not Catholic, trying to form us in our faith, who are trying to destroy the souls of millions and millions around the world because they're not adhering to the faith. And we're going to say something about it. Because as much as Michael Matt wants to say, it doesn't matter what Pope Leo says, the rest of the world sees him as Pope Leo. And the rest of the world says, hey, this guy is supposed to be in charge of the doctrine, preserving the tradition, right? And he's saying this. So it does actually matter. All of this stuff actually matters. Thank you for listening, my friends. Continue to pray for the traditional Latin Mass. Continue to pray for its restoration. But the restoration has to be done without compromise on the truth. Yes, continue to pray for the conversion of Leo. And yes, continue to pray for all of Holy Mother Church, that the errors and heresies of modernism may be once and for all eradicated. Thank you for listening, and God bless.